So, as we all know very well by now, this represents the sum total of Blue Origin's achievement, at least when it comes to flight readiness at this present time. And yes, I know they have actually flown something, and I don't need to be showing you computer-generated images, but really, I don't give a damn. I may as well be showing you this because suborbital space tourism is not real space exploration, nor should this company be taken seriously until they go to orbit. But try telling them that, or NASA that, or the federal court system that, because it's just not happening the way it should. Blue Origin's lawsuits are of course being taken extremely seriously, not because there's a huge amount of credence to them or a huge amount of legitimacy, but because of the amount of money they have to spend on high-powered attorneys. Now, I realize that I recently released a video saying that SpaceX would not be held up or impeded in any way by these lawsuits, and they would be effectively useless against Starship and its current developmental process. But now that Bill Nelson has come out with some very cautious statements about how these lawsuits could hold up Artemis, and I've had a chance to examine some articles on the subject, my position has changed a bit. Not in terms of Starship, but in terms of Artemis. Blue Origin's lawsuits are indeed endangering our chances of going back to the moon in an expeditious manner, and that is a very, very bad thing. And it's something that needs to be addressed, something that needs to be confronted, because frankly, Blue Origin could keep this whole process locked up in the courts for years, if not decades, if they wanted to. And yet, in spite of all of these problems that Blue Origin is bringing to the table when it comes to the government's ambitions to return to space, the government is still awarding Blue Origin quite a few contracts, mostly from the side of the US Space Force, but Blue Origin is securing millions and millions of dollars along with other companies who have actually been to orbit. They are the only ones who have yet to be able to achieve a single successful orbital mission that have secured tens of millions of dollars for various projects. And this is starting to become very confusing. Why does a company that is causing the government so much grief still securing new contracts with this same government? Well, the reasons, in my opinion, are very disturbing, and I'm actually at a loss as to what we may be able to do about it. But we're going to get into what these contracts are, what they represent for the future of exploration, and why I am so angry about how this is all developing. My name is Jordan Wright. I was born in the same year that the human race took its first steps on the surface of another world, and then we promptly betrayed those people's legacy by never going back. But now, over half a century later, there's a new breed of pioneers that are seeking to finish what these people set out to do so long ago. But there is trouble as well. Corrupt contractors who are looking to take advantage of one of the most underfunded departments of the US government and an unsustainable plan that is doomed to cancellation, as the Apollo project was. Something has to change. So it's time for commentators like me to stop being polite and start getting angry. So as I have mentioned a number of times on this channel, Blue Origin's mission is actually a very noble one. The entire concept of exporting heavy industry and other damaging human practices off of Earth and putting it in space. And this is a wonderful idea, and also an idea that could probably be achieved better in space given the amount of resources that are available there. And this is the rocket that they intend to use to achieve it. A rocket that, in theory, can transport a tremendous amount of payload to low Earth orbit and elsewhere, and has a reusable first stage. So the idea behind Blue Origin is not a bad one. The problem that I have always had is the fact that this company has been around longer than SpaceX and has yet to send anything into orbit, and yet they insist on being at the same table where every other company is, regardless of whether they've sent rockets to orbit or not, and that is simply absurd. For example, on September 24th, the US Space Force made an award to 4 different companies for advancing rocket technology when it comes to advanced engines, advanced second stage development, that sort of thing. And these 4 companies were as follows: Rocket Lab, SpaceX, ULA, and Blue Origin. Now, as you all know, Rocket Lab has sent missions into LEO, SpaceX has sent missions into LEO, ULA has sent missions all over the solar system, and Blue Origin has sent nothing to orbit whatsoever. And yet, they received as much funding as everyone else. As a matter of fact, they received almost $10 million more than SpaceX. And what you're looking at right now is the sum total of what Blue Origin has done when it comes to second stage technology. They are testing engines for the second stage of their New Glenn rocket. Okay, admittedly I'm oversimplifying things. I'm sure Blue Origin has made progress on the second stage of New Glenn besides these tests, but still, they don't have any operational rocket to show for it yet, not even close. The end of 2022 is the earliest, but they received $24.3 million for the cryogenic fluid management on the second stage of New Glenn. Rocket Lab got the same amount of money for the development of Neutron. SpaceX got $14.4 million for Raptor engines, and ULA got $24.3 million for the Centaur 5, which is the latest generation of their Centaur upper stage. But here's what pisses me off. The Centaur upper stage has been part of ULA's program for many, many years now on the Atlas V, and has flown to orbit many times. This is just, as I said, the latest generation of an existing system. The Raptor engines have been flight certified and, as we all know, have actually flown. The Neutron, of course, is a new development for Rocket Lab, and they haven't, of course, built this rocket, but at the same time, they have proven that they are a company that can send things to orbit. Blue Origin has done none of this, and yet they are still getting the same amount of funding. But then again, why would NASA not fund a new and emerging company that is showing a great deal of promise? Well, are they really showing promise? Because thus far, they've put ULA in a huge amount of trouble, given the fact that their BE-4 engines have been delayed by so many years, and this is actually endangering ULA's contracts with the government and the military. And yet, the government is still awarding money to Blue Origin when they could be awarding money to emerging private spaceflight companies like these guys. This, as many of you know, was the maiden flight of the Firefly Alpha. Now, is this a rocket that was designed to go to orbit? Yes. Was this a rocket that actually flew and achieved supersonic speeds? Yes. Was this a rocket that also blew up? Hell yes. But at the same time, Was it a rocket that is likely to achieve orbit inside of the next 1 to 2 years? Hell yes. And yet did this company or any company like it receive any awards from the US Space Force? Hell no. And why is that? Why would Blue Origin receive funding when they haven't even carried out a test flight of New Glenn yet? But Firefly Aerospace, they receive nothing. Now, why is this the case? Well, now some may argue, of course, that Firefly Aerospace still has a long way to go, and I would agree with that. But at the same time, obviously, so does Blue Origin, and yet they're the ones getting funding, and companies like Firefly and many others are getting nothing at all. And why is this going on? Why is the government giving money to Blue Origin when really they're in no better position to get to orbit than Firefly, perhaps even in a weaker position, and yet they're the ones who continue to get hooked up with the big-time funding from the US Space Force? It's ridiculous. However, and this is solely my opinion, it makes a hell of a lot of sense when you consider how much $1 billion is. Think about that for a moment. If you took $1 billion, just put it in the bank and earn 6% interest on it, I'm sure that Jeff Bezos gets a lot more than 6% on his holdings, but let's say it was just a 6% return on investment every year from this $1 billion. That represents $60 million a year that he would have to use on lawyers, for example, which means that he could hire a team of 6 lawyers being paid $10 million apiece full time, and they could keep suing the government every year forever, and he would never run out of money. And that is just with $1 billion, and obviously Jeff has far more than that. So the government can do one of two things. One, they can put $1 billion in the bank for their own Jeff Bezos countersuit program, but that would be a difficult thing to do because the government needs to account for every dollar they spend, and putting $1 billion aside just to keep a team of lawyers on retainer to avoid getting sued by one guy would be very difficult to justify to Congress. So the other alternative would be to keep throwing Blue Origin bones to keep Jeff Bezos from suing them nonstop, which in my opinion is what is happening right now. And this sets a terrifying precedent. What this means is that companies with billionaire founders who have limitless funds to take government agencies to court are going to secure government contracts, even though all they have to show right now is some limited progress on the factory floor and half of a fairing that they keep showing to the public, and that's about it. And yet they will continue receiving government grants and government funding simply because they're afraid of being sued. And this applies not only to Blue Origin, but any company with a billionaire founder. If you have a CEO with sufficient funds to keep the competition in court, you will never lose a contract. So what does this mean for companies like Dynetics who don't have a billionaire founder and limitless money to spend on attorneys? Well, they are simply behind the 8 ball with every proposal. Their chances of winning a contract against a company that has limitless funds to fight them and the government in court is simply remote, to say the least. Dynetics winning the Appendix N contract, for example, would likely trigger a whole series of additional lawsuits from Jeff Bezos and perhaps others, depending on the circumstances, and it would hold up Artemis even longer, because Dynetics, unlike SpaceX, doesn't have tons of their own money to invest in their program while Artemis is held up in court. Not only that, NASA also has to coordinate everything going on with Artemis and certify the projects as they proceed. This includes Lunar Starship, and of course they're not permitted to do that right now because everything is on hold while this case is in court. The fact that NASA awarded Blue Origin anything at all for Appendix Appendix N is a bit ludicrous anyway. Dynetics backed off on the lawsuit once the GAO turned down their appeal to focus on Appendix N, while Blue Origin proceeded to say that Appendix N wasn't going to work as far as future competition in Artemis was concerned because it gave the winner of the previous contract, Appendix K, too much of an advantage. And yet at the same time, they put in an application or a proposal for Appendix N, and they were awarded money, unsurprisingly, because NASA, in my opinion, was trying to placate them because it's easier than getting sued twice. This is, of course, pure conjecture. However, look at it this way. How ridiculous is it to award millions of dollars to a company that has publicly stated that they don't believe in the contract that you're giving them an award for? What sort of assurance do you have that they're going to take this contract seriously? Even worse, what happens if the existing lawsuit ends up being won by Blue Origin? What happens then? You have to start that contract all over again, and it puts Appendix N in jeopardy. This whole thing has been turned into a convoluted cluster. And of course, Artemis is in significant jeopardy. If Blue Origin wins this lawsuit, not only is it going to complicate matters, we are also going to have a lander that is 2/3 non-reusable and inherently dangerous because of the 10-meter ladder that I like talking about, on top of its other drawbacks. NASA will be stuck with this thing simply because they have no other legal recourse. Is this what we have to look forward to now? Billionaires battling out in the courtroom to decide who's going to be able to leave their legacy, their mark on our return to the moon, instead of striving to get back to the moon as quickly and expeditiously as possible? Where really is the priority right now? Is this about returning mankind to the moon, or is this about satisfying incredibly rich people's egos? Unfortunately, it certainly seems to be the latter at the moment, at least in my opinion. And this simply needs to change. But how? How can it be changed when people with this kind of money have access to this kind of litigious process? Well, the answer, of course, is to change the litigious process. If an appeal is made to the GAO about a government contract, which of course any company should be able to appeal to them, then if that appeal is turned down, it should be regarded as a frivolous lawsuit if it is taken any further to federal court. And then that company is obligated to prove that it is not a frivolous lawsuit with a very low percentage chance of success. The laws need to be amended to make it simpler for the government to proceed forward with its contracts and its objectives, whether it be space or something else, rather than getting hung up in our court system, which is becoming more and more complicated, convoluted, and inefficient by the day. However, these kinds of changes would have to go through the House, the Senate, and the Executive Office, changes that are very unlikely to happen given the power that corporate entities have in our governmental systems, not only in the United States but elsewhere. So what we're looking at now, the launch of Lunar Starship, mankind's return to the moon using the most innovative solutions possible. And once again, I'm not necessarily saying that SpaceX is the most innovative solution. There are others as well, but right now it is obvious that innovation doesn't matter. Engineering and scientific achievement doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is the amount of money that your founder and your organization has to represent themselves in the courtroom in order to win government contracts. Now, some of you may think, well, who really cares? We're moving forward with private spaceflight anyway, and it's up to private entities to return to the moon and forget about NASA. The problem is there just aren't enough companies that are focused focused on this. SpaceX is very focused, but that's about it. Blue Origin is certainly not moving aggressively to returning to the moon on their own. They're trying to do it with government help, as is just about everybody else. So unless we're going to depend on SpaceX to do all of this themselves, and incidentally, even Elon has indicated that he could really use government assistance, we are not going back to the moon anytime soon. And our return to the solar system will be left in the hands of the People's Republic of China, who do not have the same kind of litigious system that we do, and simply push forward with their objectives, regardless of whose feelings or egos they may bruise. So when Administrator Nelson says that Blue Origin has every right to sue, which is legally correct, and I would advise him to say things like that, he's not going to say whether or not Blue Origin should sue, which they simply should not be doing right now. They should proceed forward with Appendix N just as Dynetics has, and try to represent their technology in that arena rather than rehashing things that have already been done and endangering the most important endeavor of the 21st century. If you like what I have to say, if you like my opinions and my rather blunt nature when it comes to these things and my willingness to take on organizations like Blue Origin and incredibly rich founders, well, you know how to support me. It's all in the description, and I could definitely use your help, or a like and a subscribe, and I would be very, very happy. So until these organizations that are run by these amazingly rich people have a sense of responsibility to match their wealth, I urge all of you to stay angry about space.